Red Bull has decided what to do about Max Verstappen's F1 teammate for 2025, and it's taking a big risk. Sergio Perez is poised to get a new Red Bull contract despite his poor form sending clear warning signs that are apparently being ignored. And picking Perez inevitably means Red Bull has decided not to recruit outgoing Ferrari driver Carlos Sainz for fear of recreating problems from his Toro Rosso days alongside Verstappen. A tough run of 3 races for Red Bull in which Verstappen has been beaten twice has brought the worst out of Perez, who started the season brightly. The Monaco Grand Prix weekend was the obvious nadir. Perez was knocked out in Q1 on a tough day for the Red Bull RB20, although Verstappen still managed to qualify 6th. So Perez started at the back, was vulnerable to chaos, and got caught up in the massive first lap accident with Kevin Magnussen. It's almost 2 years exactly since Perez earned his last new contract, a 2-year deal that was announced after he won the 2022 Monaco Grand Prix. While that victory was controversial given the qualifying incident that left the Verstappen camp so irate, Perez's renewal was deserved as he'd started that year in good form and maintained it. History may be repeating itself in terms of Monaco coinciding with Perez securing his Red Bull future, but this time the circumstances are quite different. We understand that Perez will be re-signed, and soon. There's nothing official. Team boss Christian Horner only said that Perez's Monaco performance had not impacted the timing of Red Bull's choice. But Red Bull's mind is understood to be made up, and it's a matter of agreeing the final details in Perez's new contract. Whenever it's official, this renewal will come, despite Perez's form, not because of it. Perez's season actually started very well. So well, in fact, that only a month ago we produced a video on this very channel talking about how Perez had made a breakthrough and turned things round at Red Bull. But while the conclusion in our video, that Perez was on course for a new deal, hasn't changed, his results have taken a downturn. After finishing on the podium in 4 of the first 5 Grand Prix, as well as taking 3rd places in the China and Miami sprints, things have got worse. The Miami Grand Prix itself was okay as he started and finished 4th, having not been far behind Verstappen in qualifying, but at Imola he was eliminated in Q2 and could only recover to 8th in the race. Then his season hit its lowest point at Monaco, where he was eliminated in Q1 and then crashed on the first lap. And while Kevin Magnussen's desperately high-risk attempt to squeeze into a closing gap alongside Perez caused the collision, Perez definitely should have played the percentages and left more space. The consequences, a massive accident and a huge repair bill for Red Bull, are proof of that. Now, that's still some way off the depth of slump he endured during 2023, but it is having a similarly negative impact on his race results, and that highlights the real problem for Perez. Perez's life is being made more difficult by a combination of Ferrari and McLaren getting stronger and the specific troubles Red Bull is battling with its car. At Monaco, there were big problems with the ability of the car to handle the bumps and ride the curbs. Setup changes to soften the car and make it more compliant could improve that, but would cost significantly more performance. Therefore, to extract the most pace, the car had to be tricky to drive. That meant that when Perez was within what was an acceptable range of Verstappen earlier in the season, 3.5 tenths, he fell in Q1. Whereas last year Perez found the characteristics of the car moved away from what he was comfortable with from Barcelona onwards, just as Verstappen was getting completely dialed into the RB19, things are a little different this year. The trouble now is that Perez is still capable of setting solid lap times, but the convergence of performance means his deficit costs more positions. It creates the opportunity for Ferraris and McLarens in particular to squeeze into that gap, and, as at Imola and Monaco, for others to do it too. And that's a big concern for Red Bull, given it's not completely impossible a genuine fight could break out for the World Championship this year. It only leads Ferrari by 24 points in the Constructors' Championship, and Perez's contribution has declined, with just 4 points across the last 2 weekends. Not only does the fact Perez is getting squeezed down the order cause problems in the Constructors' Championship, but it's also bad news for Verstappen. Verstappen is still short odds favourite to win the Drivers' Championship, but the closer it gets, the more important it is for him to have a teammate who can take points off his rivals. And although Perez was doing that effectively early on, he isn't right now. And things might get closer still next season. That's why Horner believes it's essential to build his confidence back up to avoid turning what is currently only a small blip into a 2023-style malaise. Considering the Red Bull hierarchy's suggestions earlier this year that Perez's good form was down to it being contract renewal time were only partly said in jest, and the lack of pressure to make a decision, it seems strange to make the commitment now. The competitive reasons to keep Perez are weaker now than they were a few weeks ago. This suggests Red Bull bosses believe the arguments for replacing him are even worse. Sainz continues to be a fantastic alternative, but represents a tougher teammate for Verstappen, with known tensions from their Toro Rosso days that Red Bull doesn't want to revive. In short, while Verstappen's there, Sainz can't be. Red Bull would therefore only dismiss Sainz if it's confident Verstappen is staying, despite various comments from his father and Mercedes boss Toto Wolff repeatedly hinting at a potential move away. It also has no interest in promoting Yuki Tsunoda to replace Perez, despite his excellent form in the second RB team. The steadfast refusal to consider Tsunoda is baffling. He's under contract to Red Bull, which has an option on him for next season, is performing very well and consistently beating Daniel Ricciardo, and has led RB to 6th in the championship so far. He is, in no uncertain terms, Red Bull's second best driver after Max Verstappen, but despite that, Tsunoda is not seriously in the Red Bull racing picture, and it seems he never will be. Horner clearly doesn't view him as a viable driver, and there appears to be no good reason why. Concerns have previously existed about Tsunoda's emotional control and inconsistency, but he seems well on top of both now. There seems little Tsunoda can do to change his apparent status, and with principal backer Honda leaving the two Red Bull teams in 2026 to join forces with Aston Martin, his time within the Red Bull family must have a clock on it. Red Bull would happily keep Tsunoda in RB next season given his performances on track, but treading water is only viable for him for so long. His management must at least consider a good medium-term alternative, which is why, right when Tsunoda should be an outright Red Bull racing contention, the prospect of him leaving the family altogether seems credible, with Haas particularly interested. That all leaves Perez keeping the seat as the incumbent driver and most convenient option, not because he's the best one. It's a disappointing, safe and uninspiring attitude from a top team to only want a teammate for Verstappen who is just about good enough on his best days. And it doesn't come without risk, as the championship outlook for this season proves. Why should Red Bull expect anything better from Perez next year too, when its rivals will be even further along their trajectories and therefore even bigger threats? So, Red Bull is trading the risk of tension that comes with signing a better driver in Sainz, for example, for the comfort of keeping a weaker driver. It is willingly sacrificing performance and even risking a championship or two to make life easier. Horner says Red Bull cannot dismiss the threat of McLaren and Ferrari in both championships this year, but re-signing Perez is doing exactly that. It's not only that his form doesn't deserve to be rewarded with a new contract, it's that it is a red flag for Red Bull. The team seriously needs to consider whether it can win either or both championships with this second driver when the competition gets tough. When it was put to Horner that Ferrari and McLaren have two evenly matched drivers, while Red Bull has one who is 3/10 off, he replied, "I haven't missed that." And yet here we are, on the brink of a new Perez deal. Ultimately, while Perez showed at the start of 2024 what he's capable of when Red Bull has a car advantage, there is still a big question mark over whether his contribution can be big enough and consistent enough when multiple cars from rival teams are in the mix. Perhaps a return to more conventional tracks and circumstances will bring the best out of Red Bull again and help Perez get back to that early 2024 level in the process, which might be enough this year. Of course, it's possible Red Bull has something up its sleeve to re-establish the kind of car advantage we saw in 2023. But even then, Perez went missing at times, often when Verstappen was winning with ease. We can well imagine Verstappen reeling off more victories like that this season on tracks where the Red Bull is more at ease, but a consistently convincing Perez support act cannot be so easily assumed. And Red Bull is setting itself up for at least another year of that frustration and risk, just as it's coming under more pressure than ever.